What's up, everybody? Give the video a like, even if you don't like it, right? You're here for a reason. Or give it a dislike, I don't give a shit. Do something. Leave me a comment. So, oh yeah, and big shout out and a thank you to all the people who are supporting the channel behind the scenes. Um, yeah. Oh man, maybe I should start shilling for Russia, right? Maybe I'll get contacted by somebody who'll pay me some money to toe a certain party line, right? Yeah, right. So, before we start talking about the degeneracy and whatchamacallit, nihilism of, well, especially the right in the United States, let's address Bucha, which, in my opinion, sounds like anyway, neuro-linguistic programming, right? Bucha, the Bucha, right? I mean, could be a coincidence, I guess, but I mean, come on, man. Hardly anything that's on TV or out there like that on the internet is really a coincidence, right? These sort of atrocities, whoever committed them, probably happened all over the place, right? But they chose Bucha for a reason, I think, and maybe also had a hand in producing whatever happened there, right? Whatever did happen there. However true all that is, right? So, it could very well be that it was some of the far right Ukrainian groups that, killed some Russians in Kiev. Right? Because that part of Ukraine is more pro-Western, pro-Europe, more Ukrainian, I guess, maybe a little bit less Russian, versus the East being kind of the opposite to some degree. So I could see that, I could also see Wagner Group getting involved and just stirring shit up, right? There was the Belarusian president, and that could have been a psyop too. Like, it's so hard to know what's true, right? But he reported to have arrested 32. Interestingly, the Western uh, pressed the 33 number, with some articles saying initially it was 32, and then they added that one more on. But this is just how they do. Um, yeah, Lukashenko reported arresting dozens of Wagner operatives in Belarus right at the time of the elections, alleging that they were there to stir things up, right? Just as it was alleged they were, or people like that from Russia, Russian operatives were there at Maidan helping to create that fucking quagmire, right? So, I mean, no one should be surprised because that's how USSR has always operated, right? That's how these powerful nations, United States, or agents within United States, agents within Russia, right? Just because some Russians are doing some things doesn't mean that they necessarily have Putin's approval. I get that. But, it is what it is. Because there are, the aforementioned GRU, FSB, there's military intelligence that do things the way they want to do things, right? And they don't always agree with one another, all of them, right? Which is probably why Putin has somebody tasting all the food he eats before he eats it, right? You know what I mean? And it looks like they're trying to get rid of him too. But then again, and that's some delicious coffee right there. That in and of itself could be a psyop. So it's just so hard to know, right? What is true, what isn't. Which is, in my opinion, which is why, in my opinion, the best conclusion, most likely conclusion, is that to some degree, all these people up top are working together and against us, right? Even though, again, they may disagree on a lot of particulars, different issues. Ultimately, these people work from within the shadows. They're very secretive and they have no qualms about eliminating their opposition, killing innocent people. So, if only in some wicked way, ideologically, they're aligned, right? Normal people like you and I, we just want to live in peace, prosper, raise families, maybe some of us, right? Grow our own food, go to work, relax, take vacations, right? We don't want to bother anybody. We just want to live our lives and enjoy ourselves and be left the fuck alone to a large degree. Some of us more than others, right? Right? That's I think that's a lot of us. Most of us probably, right? Those clowns up top, I mean, they have wholeheartedly different ideas. World domination, and, growing their empire, hoarding more and more resources, money, controlling other people, this type of shit, right? So, Bucha, we could sit here, long story short, right? Let's cut to the chase. We could sit here and speculate, and obviously the Putin stooges will say, oh, it was the Azov, right? Without a shred of fucking evidence. Or they'll say, oh, well, the whole thing is shady, thus Ukraine did it, right? Yeah, it is shady. Like the whole thing about, um, Bucha being liberated, and then 3 or something like that days later, these atrocities come to light, right? What took so long, right? Well, yeah, that is shady, but that doesn't mean that Ukrainians did it, right? Could it be, right? Like if you eliminate all this bias, all these preconceived notions that you have, like Putin good, right? Like how satanic do you have to be to even allow that thought to still, right? I could see why some people may have been confused a while back. Surely I was, but by now, eh, anyway. So let's say Bucha got liberated, right? And but there was still some Russian fighters left behind, right? I mean, withdrawal isn't necessarily all very how do I put this, clean and surgical and cohesive, right? You're getting your ass kicked. You're running away, right? Maybe in some instances, right? Some people are getting caught off, right? As Ukrainians are advancing and the Russians are backing up, there's people who are wounded or knocked out or they have no ammo or whatever, and they hide, right? So the bulk of Russian forces is forced out, retreats, and then there's some stragglers trying to sneak away, right? Little by little in the middle of the night. And then Russians, right? And then maybe some civilians notice them and start pointing to them, saying get them, or what are you doing here, or fuck you Russian, so on and so forth, right? And then they get killed, butchered, or they get tied up and told to shut up, right? Because these people are trying to retreat uh, somewhat undercover, right? But these people are a problem. They make a lot of noise, and they get bound up and killed, or we could, depending on what bias you have, you could imagine whatever the fuck you want. But ultimately, none of us know what happened, right? It could be that these people were fighting, right? These women and children were fighting against. Obviously, I'm clowning a little bit, but some of those people who were slaughtered or whatever were fighting against the Russians, so they were no longer really civilians, and they got killed, and then Ukrainians showed up and bound them up to make it look worse, right? I mean, there's a huge propaganda war going on, and for whatever reason, right, Ukraine is being allowed to win that war, the propaganda war. And in my opinion, they're being allowed to have success to a degree. But in my opinion, Russia's going to come back with vengeance, and this thing is going to drag out, because that's the plan, in my opinion, for this thing to drag out and plunge the global economy into depression slowly but surely, right? First COVID, now this, and then they're going to have something else, probably more COVID and more armed conflict, and it's going to take maybe a decade, right? But this is the goal, in my opinion. I mean, why is Putin allegedly giving Syrians and some of these other mercenaries 6-month long contracts, right? Well, because they're planning for this to go on for a while. So, yeah, like, depending on whatever bias you have, you could interpret Bucha to blame this side, to blame that side. But we already know whose fault this is, right? We already know whose fault this is. The global elites, right? World Economic Forum, leaders, world leaders, they're conspiring against us. But if you really want to pick a side to pick on, right? Well, clearly it's the country or the madman, the military that invaded another country, right? It's the country that started a war. And this whole nonsense about Donbass, how Ukraine was somehow fighting Russia or started a war in Russia on their own territory, like, get the hell out of here. That's Ukraine, okay? Those provinces are Ukraine. Yeah, there's a problem with Russian separatists. Sure. Sponsored by Kremlin, right? Militarily. And their ranks being fed by Russian soldiers covertly, right? So that's Russia attacking Ukraine. Now, the conflict may or may not have started organically, if you will, right? But we know, you could just look this up, it's not that difficult, that Russia has been involved in there covertly and has been fighting Ukraine for 8 years down there. They were involved in Maidan, allegedly, right? No, it's only the West that meddles. The Russians are pious, religious, peace-loving people, right? Something like 80% of them want to nuke Europe, right? Invade Europe, or nuke them if need be. Pious, peace-loving, totally not degenerate. Definitely not nihilistic, right, people? So yeah, like, in other words, Bucha would have never happened if Putin didn't invade, didn't foment the war in Donbass, and if he didn't invade Ukraine. If he kept his, mercenaries out of Maidan, didn't meddle in other countries' politics, right? But this is what these elites do, right? This is what these politicians do on both sides, obviously. But it's just so convenient all of a sudden that, like, or, I've talked about it this a million times already. Just all of a sudden, people who are anti-degeneracy, supposedly, who are not nihilistic at all, supposedly, and they're, pro-family, supposedly, right? Anti-establishment, supposedly, all these things, all of a sudden, they're proving to be the exact opposite, right? They're pro-war. Oh, and people who are supposed to be pro-freedom. I'm talking about the political right in the liberal world order, right? All of a sudden, they're pro-war, pro the destruction of family, right? All these men being made to stay while the women and children leave the country, along with brown men, not Ukrainian men, in other words, right? They're being these waves of these Ukrainian women and Middle Eastern or what have you refugees, men, right? You have Ukrainian women and children almost exclusively, and then you have Middle Eastern men almost exclusively, right? Being carted away together, forced out together into, Central and Western Europe. Gee, what's that all about? Oh, I don't know. Take another sip. Right, but these people that are pro-family are all of a sudden pro this, right? These people that are pro-freedom are all of a sudden rooting for a complete and utter tyrant, right? And by proxy, that other complete and utter tyrant, Xi Jinping, right? Like Dugin talks about the Eurasian, forming this Eurasian empire, right? New Rome. And some of these right-leaning people in the West want to pretend like that like you could have that without China, right? I mean, like, keep lying to yourselves, clowns, right? You're supporting tyranny when you're supposed to be pro-freedom somehow, right? You're supposed to be religious, morality is supposed to be objective. All of a sudden, it's cool to murder innocent people, right? War is justified all of a sudden because why? No justification. And they won't come out and say this explicitly because they probably realize on some level how hypocritical it is, right? How wrong this is. How nihilistic this is, right? War, this destruction. But you could tell that, like, just by bashing the West and pretending like and not criticizing Putin, right? They've taken the side, and some of them are just outright saying that Putin has the right to do this, which I've already discussed a million times. Like, zero morally objective justification why it's okay, right? Explain this to me, for those of you who are supposedly conservative, supposedly pro-freedom, pro-family, pro-tradition, which all these things that you think Putin is, right? Explain to me, why is it not okay? Do it. Don't run away, right? Don't call me names. Don't call me a degenerate because I drink coffee. Like, how pathetic can you be? Seriously. Tell me why, right? Don't be a coward. Tell me why it's not okay to eliminate a one-day-old zygote, right? Human. And why it's okay to murder innocent people in Ukraine. Explain that one to me, right? People on the right who love their meat, right, make this sort of argument against the vegans all the damn time. I mean, the hypocrisy is it's ridiculous, right? You don't have any values. It's just whatever's clever, right? Might is right. There is no objective morality. So, I'm telling you guys right now, anyone who is caping for Putin in this thing, who's taking Putin's side in this war, right, is a Russian asset. Obviously, I'm talking about people who have a presence, influencers, right? Those people, presence online. That doesn't mean that they're getting a check from the Kremlin like every month, right? This is done a lot more covertly and tactfully, right? By proxy. And in many cases, these people don't even know that they're Russian assets, right? And even if you're not getting any money by proxy from any Russians or pro-Russian think tanks, right? And a lot of them are. But even if you're not, you're still a Russian asset by towing this completely illogical and seemingly antithetical to the worldview you seem to profess, right? You're being a fucking hypocrite. And, you're getting likes, you're getting donations from other stooges like yourself. Like you're profiting from this in some way, shape, or form. That's why you're doing it, right? And maybe it feels good also because I don't know, feelings and shit. Zero value, like no values, no morality, none of that, right? Just fifis. Huh? So, but that being said, I think a lot of influencers, um, anyone that's connected to Alex Jones, right? Probably you should be suspect of. Um, Anybody who is just connected to all these various Russian think tanks that are out there. You know what I mean? Gaia TV, for example. Um, Anybody who promotes Dugin, right? Just any Westerner who is in some way, shape, or form ostensibly Russian. You know what I mean? Like all these people should be suspect, and a lot of them are just Russian assets and get paid in rubles, basically. Let me take another sip. Right, they'll talk about smart cities and World Economic Forum and the West, the West, the West, the West, right? The people that blame the West and completely gloss over the fact that the same shit is happening to Putin and in Russia, right? They'll talk about how U.S. is sponsoring China, right, with technology and how U.S. is investing in the development of China, building up this monster, so on and so forth. How they won't cut them off to destroy their economy, right? They'll put that on the West, and then they completely ignore Putin's relationship with China, right? People who the people who will talk about how the West is in bed with Israel when it's actually more likely that Israeli intelligence agencies infiltrated the American power structure. And like look at the political left in the United States, ostensibly anti-Israel, right? But then again, so is George Soros, right? He's a persona non grata in Israel, right? But Putin, who kicked him out, right, is working very closely with Israel, which is like, what, 50% exiled Russian Jews or something like that? 80% Eastern Central European Slavic Jews, right? Exiled. Isn't that what Israel is? Oh, right. And then there's that 20% German coalition, right? That German component. You have that, you know, Zionistic coalition going on there, right? They'll talk about West and China connections, West and Israel connections, and then they completely ignore Russia-China connections, Russia-Israel connections, right? They'll talk about how Putin is fighting the cabal by kicking out George Soros when so did Israel. Right? Because he wants Israel to not exist anymore, right? He thinks it's a failed project and it needs to go. So these are Putin's stooges, right? Are they just ignorant of all these things? Maybe. But it's actually more likely that they're being paid, a lot of them anyway, to toe a certain party line. And I think, yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of them probably are ignorant and they just don't look that way. And they are uh, socially engineered to not look that way, right? By, because Putin rides around on a bare chested, and you know they just you know get a hard on for that, the manly men and totally not non-LGBT men that they are, right? But there are millions of contradictions with these people, right? They don't make any fucking sense. right? Because they're demoralized and degenerate. I love how the political right will talk about how the West is demoralized and degenerate and all of that, right? Just not them. Like, but that you are the West. That's where you live. That's where you come from. That's where you were raised. What brainwashed you, right? Somehow you're like the chosen one who was able to break through the programming and see through the nonsense, and you're like the beacon. You're like the beacon of light in the darkness, right? You're the Prometheus carrying light, bringing light to the people, right? In this darkness, in this demoralized darkness. You shine through. In this darkness. So how is it that you were able to escape the programming, right? In light of the fact that you don't have any values, right? Which would make you a degenerate. You can't explain to me why abortion is not cool, but Putin's war is. You can't explain that to me, right? You can't explain to me why you're supposedly pro-family, but you're totally cool with the destruction of the family unit in Ukraine, right? You, there's all these inconsistencies in your worldview. Your worldview doesn't make any sense, right? You're supposedly against nihilism, but at the same time you're pro-war. And what kind of war, right? Well, how is it that these people in the West, the people on the right, not all obviously, how is it that they support a people, right, Russians, whose ideology, by and large, is very much anti-Western, right? You're anti-Western. You live in the West, and you're anti-West. And you're supporting an ideology and people like Putin and Dugin who hate the West. I mean, Putin, these guys, Dugin, and they speak with forked tongues, man. They do. So when they talk to the West, they tone the shit down. But when they talk to their own people in their own language, oh, their rhetoric is very much anti-Western, right? But they're postmodernists and they're full of shit. Like, their message doesn't really make any sense. They're all over the place, right? Putin will come out and say that, the whole climate scare is nonsense, and then you look at Russia and they're pushing the green agenda hard, right? Putin says he's anti-globalist, and then he works with Klaus Schwab, and probably Charles too. The whole Schwab family, right? Because Putin probably is a Schwab, right? By that I mean, a shape-shifting German. Schwab is, if you know much about alternative history, Schwab is that crossover between Slav and German, right? Swabians, Schwab. That's where those two civilizations met, right? The Semitic and the Japhetite. Let me take another sip, man. So, take the right in the West being anti-LGBT, right? This sort of, it's all a psyop, obviously, right? And not only, and though they may deny, some of them anyway, the influence that these Marxists, right, KGB agents, these Soviet agents, how they infiltrated U.S. and also again French Marxists, but same ideology, right? How they infiltrated the West, the university most notably, and influenced the Western mind, and degenerated it, right? Because as Yuri Bezmenov told you, and some people that downplay Yuri, right? People that blame the West for Russia's war, people that downplay Yuri Bezmenov's um, what he divulged about the KGB and the Soviet Union, people who downplay that shit, right? They should, make your spidey senses tingle. They're Russian assets, as explained in the beginning of this video, right? So they'll ignore, downplay, for whatever reason, Russia's, if you will, or Marxist influences in the United States, what these things that helped degenerate liberalism, right? Liberalism was never supposed to be, anti-family, anti-community, uh, pro-LGBT, pro-postmodern, right? It was never supposed to be those things. That's not liberalism, right? Those are outside influences, right? That came from somewhere else and degenerated liberalism, right? If so, people today, a lot of people in the West are against liberalism, right? While at the same time saying that the West is degenerated, right? So they're not really against liberalism, right? Because they've benefited from it. The only reason why they're able to talk shit on the internet and make a living just by yapping, talking a whole bunch of, I don't give a shit how many books they've read, hardly any of them make any fucking sense, right? Why? Because they're degenerated, right? They're infiltrated. Their minds have been infiltrated and corrupted by these. Well, let's just call it what it is, Satan, right? They're incoherent. They don't make any fucking sense. I don't give a shit how intelligent or how verbally skillful they may be, right? They're not fooling me. So they say they're anti-liberalism while at the same time admitting that liberalism is degenerated, right? So they're not actually anti-liberal because that is what has afforded them, seemingly paradoxically, the ability to criticize liberalism and make a living at it, right? And they don't even realize this, right? A lot of them anyway. So they're not really anti-liberalism. They're anti what liberalism has become. Themselves admitting that it's degenerated, that it's no longer liberalism, right? Because that's not what liberalism is supposed to be. Now, it could be that because it's liberal in some way, liberalism is more susceptible to being degenerated in that way, right? Because it kind of has that, it affords you a lot of freedom, right? Right, but again, just because you allow people to be free the way we are meant to be, that doesn't mean that we're going to naturally degenerate, right? You had to have Satan come in and destroy that. Duh. How did these people not realize? Like, they'll tell you this outright, that liberalism is degenerated, right? And that they're anti-liberal at the same time. No. You can't be anti while at the same time benefiting from liberalism, being exactly that which they are, because liberalism has afforded them to be that. And yet, and even though this Western system is somehow degenerated, they aren't degenerated, even though they're completely fucking incoherent. They don't make any sense, right? And they don't even realize, it would seem, that they're not actually anti-liberalism. They're anti whatever has become liberalism with these Marxist, because of these Marxist or whatever the fuck have you, Soviet influences, right? Like, it really isn't that complicated, but it's kind of a quagmire, I guess. And then, again, the reason why this sort of incoherence is there also is because these people are financially rewarded for being that, right? because the system is degenerated. But somehow they don't realize this. You know what I mean? So, long story short, instead of reforming liberalism or regressing back to what liberalism was intended to be, what it is at its core, right? Now, I'm not saying it's perfect or anything like that, but everybody in the world prefers that. If you don't brainwash people with these nihilistic, crazy ideas, right? Most people in the world prefer liberalism. Look, people aren't coming over to America or moving to the West for the LGBT nonsense, by and large. That's not why they're going there. Now, that is a problem with the West, and that is there, and that is something they're going to deal with, but that's not why they're going there, right? So, kind of lost my train of thought here, but I'm sure you get the point on what it is that I'm saying. So instead of being what they're supposed to be, right? Or they don't even understand what it is that they are, right? They call themselves conservatives when conservatism just conserves that which already is. They need to be regressives. But maybe they don't do this anymore. For a long time, they were calling progressives regressives, which doesn't make any fucking sense, right? Progressive, regressive. Well, what the fuck do you mean? You're supposed to be the regressive. You're supposed to go try to turn back the clock, trying to go back to a way things used to be to some degree, right? Again, not saying it's perfect, not saying that it can be improved upon, but a lot of the things that have progressed in the wrong direction, you're supposed to be regressing it. And they don't even realize this. They seem to think they seem to understand on some level that that's who they're supposed to be, but they keep calling themselves conservatives, and they keep conserving the status quo, which, if one, as I explained many times already, if one party is progressing and the other one is merely conserving, then the whole system is ultimately progressive, meaning that you, being part of this degenerate system, you are progressive too. and then we look at you, and you're supporting the devil, right? Without acknowledging the devil's infiltration into your mind, you're and your ideology, you're literally showing that that has happened by supporting them. But to acknowledge the Soviet Marxist influence on America, right? You'd have to reject Putin and someone like Xi Jinping by association. But they don't want to do that. That's why you see these people come out and praise someone like Xi Jinping for or Putin for being ostensibly anti-LGBT, right? Or banning effeminate men off TV and things of that nature, right? All of a sudden you have people who are supposed to be liberals, right? Who are supposed to allow freedom, supporting authoritarians, right? You're degenerated. Obviously you're degenerate. Because that's not what liberalism's supposed to be. Right? That's not what liberalism isn't LGBT. I mean, Dugin is on record saying that we need to use BLM and LGBT to destabilize, divide, and conquer America, destroy the West. He literally comes out and says this, right? But I guess you gotta, I don't know, just be honest, maybe do a little bit of research and listen to or read the translation of Dugin when he speaks Russian, right? Because when he talks to you in English, his English isn't that good to begin with, and he's Satan. He speaks with a forked tongue. He's gonna kiss your ass to some degree while stabbing you in the fucking back, because that's what they do. These people infiltrate. This is just their MO. We know this. Right? But again, people on the right don't want to accept this, because then they would have to admit that their mind is mush, that they've been infiltrated and corrupted and degenerated. They would have to admit that. But they don't admit that. They hold themselves up. They virtue signal. I mean, and then they complain so much about the left virtue signaling, which it does, but then they do the same exact thing, not realizing that they're one and the same to a large degree, right? And yeah, I talk about, because some idiot is going to come around and say this nonsense. Yes, I talk about objective morality and what's proper and who we should be. I get that, right? But if I were merely virtue signaling, I would change my mind about that when convenient. I haven't. I don't care who it is, what language they speak, values, principles remain the same. I put everybody under the same lens, under the same scrutiny. The paradigm doesn't shift simply because, the invader now speaks Russian. We're anti-expansionist Western policy and invasion of, sovereign countries and America being the world police. We're anti that. But then when it comes to Putin and he's doing the same thing, obviously he can't do it to the same degree because he's not as powerful. All of a sudden, it's A-okay. You were just virtue signaling when you were talking about family values and, the nuclear family, cohesion, nihilism, and all this stuff. You were just virtue signaling because clearly you don't actually hold to these principles. Duh. Because once again, you're part of the degenerate West that you admit exists. And there you are, degenerated. So the point is in order for the West to turn around and purge, cleanse, right, regress, become what it's supposed to be. Again, maybe not perfect, but as good as it gets right now, for them, sure. Right? What, you want USSR gulags? Really? That's what you want? You're into that? You want prison camps like they're building in China right now? Is that what you want? You want concentration camps like Germany and Russia had? Or USSR? The same thing. Is that what you want? You want those concentration camps? Let me take another sip of my coffee. We're going to wrap this up. Sorry, I'm fucking rambling. But, you let me know where I'm contradicting myself or not making any sense. I'm not perfect either. But I try. And that's the whole point, right? We're supposed to... You're supposed to be... You say this, right? People on the right. That you're anti-degeneracy. And the West is a problem. In order for you to be able to fix that, turn the ship around, you have to recognize how you yourself have been degenerated, how your mind has been infiltrated by these Marxist ideas, how you're not making any sense, right? You have to admit and realize your part in this so that you can correct you have to start with yourself. And that's going to happen when you admit that you are at fault too, instead of always pointing the finger at somebody else and virtue fucking signaling. Right? This is why I made a video a long time ago saying that we are all degenerates. We all played our part in this. The reason why the world looks the way it does is our fault. But the right... People on the right pretend to be so morally pure and amazing and great, and none of this is their fault. They just point a finger at somebody else, right? You have been successfully divided and you're in the process of being conquered. And you can't even smell your own fucking farts. So one more contradiction. You point at the vegans, the people on the left, the super duper leftists, right? These crazy people, insane motherfuckers who want us to eat nothing but grass and bugs, right? Who want to sequester all the carbon, which is necessary for the existence of carbon-based life on this planet, right? They're pushing us to the brink of fucking destruction. You point this out and you say this is, right, abortion. And you say, this is nihilistic, it's wrong, it's anti-God, nihilism, Nietzsche, right? The God is dead, blah, 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 all this fucking rhetoric. Yeah, I get it. While at the same time, you're supporting and promoting and defending and aligning yourself with the exact Satan that has infiltrated your Western ideology and corrupted it from within and made it the degenerate ideology that it is now. It's evolved into something different. This isn't liberalism. It is to a degree, but it's degenerated liberalism, right? You are literally supporting the forces that have degenerated your own culture from within the shadows while talking about shadow government. And you're supporting, right, World War III, countries with China, if only by proxy, right? Because, that'd be major fucking cognitive dissonance to admit that that's what you're doing by proxy, right? That's why you deny the Russia-China connection, the Russia-Israel connection, right? Speaking of nihilistic fucking ideology, right? Jesus fucking Christ. Let's put all these Jews in with Muslims let's surround them all with Muslims and give them nukes. Talk about nihilism, right? But you're supporting this Soviet Marxist, whatever the fuck you want to call it, leftist Satan, while at the same time pretending to be anti-left. I mean, this is so fucked up and it's so obvious. But you're supporting the ideology and the military and the elites, right? That have infiltrated and destroyed the West to a large degree, divided and are in the midst of conquering the West. The people, right, that want to destroy you. Let me say that again so that it sinks in. Not only have they initiated the process of the destruction of the West by infiltrating and degenerating it, right, from within, a lot of them now openly talk about destroying the West. The way they program the Russians to hate you is with this LGBT nonsense, right? These young Russian men that are being pushed into armed services are being told that they're going to fight the gay ideology of the West, right? That's one of the ways they are being programmed, and you are too, right? You're being programmed to hate yourself. You're literally supporting a guy like Dugin, if only by proxy. You're supporting that force, right? Dugin, to a large degree, is just he's a figurehead, right? He's like the tip of the iceberg, right? Most of the iceberg is underwater, underground, whatever the hell you want to call it, in the shadows, shadow government, right? You're literally supporting an ideology that has a lot of military power and a very, very significant nuclear arsenal that's fucking pointed at you, right? You're literally supporting the demon that wants to destroy you while living in the West as a Westerner, while talking about how the West is degenerate and nihilistic, except not you. Oh man, yeah, it took me forever to get this shit out, and you probably already got it halfway through this fucking video, but hey, we got here we are. The West is, yeah, it's degenerate, it's nihilistic, it's self-destructive, right? Because it was infiltrated by Satan, and, well, it's all your fault and my fault, right? Right? What did I get wrong here? I thought so.